Who was Opal? To try to answer this question, I must go back about 60 years to the time when I was at university. While I was a student, I was loaned a book by the head of the zoology department. It was a diary, said to have been written by a young child, not older than 8 years. I was training to teach, and I was told that the book would give me an insight into the mind of a young child, particularly in relation to her feelings about the natural world. This it did, but it did more than that. It opened up to me the fascinating world of the inner life of children. This is how it came about. I was captured by this child, by her mind, her sensitivity to the world about her, and by her remarkable ability to put her thoughts into words. I read the book to children and to students. It made a strong impression on them all, but no one seemed to have heard of Opal Whiteley. At last, 20 years later, in the mid-50s, I was working in the British Broadcasting Corporation. Here was the opportunity I wanted to make Opal and her diary known. I prepared a programme about her. Before any programme can be broadcast, as I'm sure you know, one has to find out if there are any living relatives and get their permission and approval. I made all the usual inquiries and was told that Opal had died in hospital about 10 years before and had left no living relatives. There would be no problem, I thought, and the programme was broadcast. Little did I know what was to come of it. A few days after the broadcast, I received a letter from someone who had heard it. She said, "I think this is the person we knew in Hampstead as the little princess." She went on. "An Irish friend of mine once met a sad little woman in the Catholic chapel and took her home to supper. The little lady ate sandwiches in a way that showed she was very hungry, and spoke only a little in a soft, cultured voice. She was very grateful, and of course was asked to come again. Thus began a series of weekly visits which continued over some years. She talked a lot to my friend and took her to her room, a single room stacked from floor to ceiling with books and magazines. And there my friend saw a thing which shook her. An article in an English magazine, The Queen, and the author of the article was given as Princess Françoise de Bourbon-Orléans. There was a photograph of the author on the front page. It was the same little lady she had been befriending. I was now about to start on a trail which would go on for the next 40 years, with no sign of ending, but I did not know that. The first thing was to follow the clue about the article in the Queen magazine. I went to the London offices and made inquiries. Nobody remembered anything. I went down into the cellars and searched through the old dusty copies of the magazine, and at last I found it. The author was given as the Princess Françoise de Bourbon-Orléans, and the heading read, "The Princess is a descendant of the two great royal houses of France, and is the only child of the late Prince Henri d'Orléans and his cousin Princess Marie. She has had an adventurous and arduous career, following in the footsteps of her father, a famous explorer, and has travelled extensively in India." I reread the preface to the diary, written by the editor of the Atlantic Monthly. He wrote in 1920, "Opal Whiteley was born about 22 years ago, when or where we have no knowledge. Of her parents, whom she lost before her 5th year, she is sure of nothing except that they loved her, and that she loved them with a tenacity of affection as strong now as at the time of parting. To recall what manner of people they were, no physical proof remains, except 2 precious little copybooks, which held their photographs, and into which, day by day, her mother taught her to set down with tender patience all that she learned, both of the world about her and of that older world of legend and history with which the diarist shows such capricious and entertaining familiarity. These books, for reasons beyond her knowledge, were taken away from Opal when she was about 12 years of age, and have never been returned, although there is ground for believing that they are still in existence." I reread the diary, and as I did so I came across entries that I had not noticed before, which now became significant. "We went on along the dim trail. There by the dim trail grow the honeysuckles. I nod to them as I go that way. In the daytime I hear them talk with sunbeams in the wind. They talk in shadows with the little people of the sun. And this I have learned. Grown-ups do not know the language of shadows. Angel Mother and Angel Father did know, and they taught me. I wish they were here now, here to listen with me. I do so want them. Sometimes they do seem near. I have think sometimes kind God just opens the gates of heaven and lets them come out to be guardian angels for a little while. Opal herself had written in the foreword to the diary, and there was Father in those few days when he was home from far lands. Those were wonderful days, his homecoming days. Then he would take me on his knee and ride me on his shoulder and tell me of the animals and birds of the far lands. Of her angel mother she wrote, "There were walks in the fields and woods. When on these walks Mother would tell me to listen to what the flowers and trees and birds were saying. We listened together, and on the way she told me poems and other lovely things, some of which she wrote in the 2 books, and also in others which I had not with me in the lumber camps. On the walks and after we came back she had me to print what I had seen and heard. After that she told me of different people and their wonderful work on earth. Then she would have me to tell again to her what she had told me." Who were these angel parents, and who was Opal? Next I found the name of the hospital to which she had gone, and where I understood she had died. Hoping to find something more, I wrote to the superintendent. His reply was not what I expected. He said, "I suggest you might be able to visit the hospital to discuss Miss Opal Whiteley, and this I think would be the most satisfactory solution. The lady in fact is not dead, but is still a patient here." This in itself was surprise enough, but there was more to come. I waited for the day of the interview in a strange tension of feeling. Opal had been a living personality to me for so long, I feared disappointment. I went to the hospital one day in June and was taken to see the medical superintendent. He listened with interest to what I could tell him. He and the other doctors had treated Opal's claim to royal birth as a delusion. He sent for Opal. He spoke of her as the princess, and when she came in, he introduced her to me by the same title. The impact of this first meeting with Opal was something I was not prepared for. She had about her a dignity which I had not expected to find, which made me think at once of Queen Victoria. I saw a small, rather rotund little person, aged about 60, with greying hair and very large, soft brown eyes. She was shabbily dressed in a badly fitting brown woolen jumper and skirt, but she had undoubted graciousness and charm. She held out her small hand to me, a gesture which almost made me feel I should bow over it. I particularly noticed her hands. They were not the hands of a labourer's child, but unusually small and delicate. We sat down, and she began to talk. She spoke for over an hour, and showed the same remarkable quality of memory which appears in her diary. In childhood she had memorized the names of the good and great, told to her, as she claimed, by her angel parents, and now her amazing memory held the names of every crowned and once crowned head in Europe, with all their cousins and aunts and brothers and nephews. She gave the dates to the months and day of their births and deaths, and many events of their lives and of her own, without faltering for a moment. Prompted by occasional questions, she talked without pausing, except when the corners of her mouth drooped in sadness as she spoke of her unfinished writing, or stiffened in anger at her imagined wrongs, or when, suddenly, she broke into her sweet and warming smile. When the interview was over, I felt it was I who was being dismissed. I came away from the hospital with a tangle of confused information and a vivid impression of a fascinating and lively mind. Which of the many stories she had told were true? This strange claim of hers to royal birth, should it be dismissed as a dream of greatness conceived by a lonely child? What connection was there between her present claim to be a princess of the House of Orleans and the hints in the diary about angel parents? Could this lonely, highly sensitive and imaginative child have conjured the whole story out of her fertile mind? And in her days and years of study of the Royal House of France, had she grown to believe the story she had originally fabricated? Or was her claim in fact true? Was she actually the great-great-granddaughter of the last King of France? Was it possible that in the early days of the century, troubled days for France and the royal house, a child close to the throne might have been removed either for political reasons or for a ransom, and hidden in the rough surroundings of an Oregon lumber camp? When she was admitted to hospital, all Opal's books and papers had been sent into store in the East End of London. The rental had been paid by a well-known fellow Catholic, the Honourable Mrs. Woodruff. She had befriended Opal many years ago, and through her I was allowed to search through Opal's papers and take what I wanted. Bit by bit I pieced her story together. Where she was born seems uncertain. At one time she claimed it was the Vatican, but at that time there were no regular registrations of births, and all inquiries were fruitless. What is certain is that from about 1902, when she may have been about 5, she was living in Oregon, in the family of a logger and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Whiteley. The family moved from camp to camp. In fact, they moved 19 times, so that Opal's schooling must have been very broken. But in spite of this, she eventually found her way to university. She was admitted there without any of the usual qualifications. There is no doubt that she was a very unusual student. The local paper said, "In 3 days she became the talk of the faculty of 3 educational institutions." The head of the geological department of the university, Dr. Warren D. Smith, said, "She knows more about geology than do many students that have graduated from my department. She may become one of the greatest minds Oregon ever produced. She will be an investment for the university." After leaving university, she travelled about, picking up a living here and there by giving nature lessons to children, by writing, and by giving talks and lectures. At one time she tried to get into films. She wrote a book about nature intended for children. It was called The Fairyland Around Us. She had difficulty in finding a publisher, and eventually took it to the Atlantic Monthly in Boston. This is how the editor, Ellery Sedgwick, described her visit. Late on an afternoon in September, Opal Whiteley came into the Atlantic's office with a book which she had had printed in Los Angeles. The book was quaintly embellished with coloured pictures, pasted in by hand, and bore 100 marks of special loving care. Yet about it there seemed little to tempt the publisher. But about Opal Whiteley herself there was something to attract the attention even of a man of business, something very young and eager and fluttering, like a bird in a thicket. The talk went as follows. "I'm afraid we can't do anything with the book, but you must have had an interesting life. You have lived much in the woods?" "Yes, in lots of lumber camps." "How many?" 19. At least we moved 19 times. One close question followed another regarding the surroundings of her girlhood. The answers were so detailed, so sharply remembered, that the next question was natural. "If you remember like that, you must have kept a diary." Her eyes opened wide. "Yes, always. I do still." "Then it is not this book I want, but the diary." She caught her breath. "It's destroyed. It's all torn up." Tears were in her eyes. "You loved it?" "Yes, I told it everything." "Then you kept the pieces?" "Yes, I've kept everything. The pieces are all stored in Los Angeles." We telegraphed for them, and they came crammed in a hat box. Hundreds, thousands, one might say 500,000 of them. Some few were large as a half sheet of notepaper, more scarce big enough to hold a letter of the alphabet. The paper was of all shades, sorts and sizes, butcher's bags pressed and sliced in two, wrapping paper, the backs of envelopes, anything and everything that could hold writing. The labour of piecing the diary together may fairly be described as enormous. For 9 months, almost continuously, the diarist had laboured, piecing it together sheet by sheet, each page a kind of picture puzzle. As each sheet was fitted together and could be read, it was typed out, only the spelling and punctuation being altered. And in March 1920 it began to be published as a series of articles in the Atlantic Monthly, with the title The Journal of an Understanding Heart. A few months later, the New York firm of Putnam published it as a book, with a preface written by Ellery Sedgwick. While the diary was being pieced together, a remarkable discovery was made. Here and there in the diary there are lists of names of birds and flowers in French, and names of French rivers. Opal calls these songs, which she says her angel father taught her. Here is one. She has taken a walk to the river. When we were come to the bridge, we made a stop, and I did sing to the rivière a song. I sang it the chant de Seine, de Havre, de Tesson, et Nonette, et Lyon, et Héron, et Darnetal, et Hoc, et Rille, et Lang, et et Odelle, et Nonette, et Sac. I sang it as Angel Father did teach me to, and as he has wrote it in the book. This list appears to be an innocent recital of a random collection of French rivers, and as such it appeared in the journal and in the diary, and passed without comment, until one day a reader examined it, and made the remarkable discovery that if one takes the first letter of each of these rivers, after Seine, it will be found that they spell the name Henri d'Orléans. Another list, this time of birds, gives the name of Prince Henry's father, Robert d'Orléans. Other lists give the name of Prince Henry's mother, and others of the royal family. The effect of the publication of the diary was dramatic. Soon after its appearance in America, it was published in England, and the chairman of the firm said, "The whole of Fleet Street is absorbed in this book." The Morning Post said it was one of the most entrancing books that were ever printed. The Daily Telegraph wrote, "Every true lover of children will read it spellbound." The Observer called it a fascinating picture of the child mind, and the chairman of the publishing firm Putnam wrote, "We consider it one of the most attractive and important books we have ever published." Here is an extract from the diary. Opal has been carrying out one of her chores, picking up potatoes in the field. All the times I was picking up potatoes, I did have conversations with them. Too, I did have thinks of all their growing days there in the ground, and all the things they did hear. Earth voices are glad voices, and earth songs come up from the ground through the plants, and in their flowering, and in the days before these days are come, they do tell the earth songs to the wind, and the wind in her goings does whisper them to folks to print for other folks, so other folks do have knowing of earth songs. I have thinks these potatoes growing here did have knowings of star songs. I have kept watch in the field at night, and I have seen the stars look kindness down upon them, and I have walked between the rows of potatoes, and I have watched the star gleam on their leaves. And as the wind did go walking in the field, talking to the earth voices there, I did follow her down the rows. I did have feels of her presence near. But all this intense interest in Opal was short-lived. Before long, people began to question the authenticity of the diary and to say it was a hoax. Ellery Sedgwick himself wrote to Barbara Ward of The Economist in 1953, "On the genuineness of the story printed in The Atlantic, I will stake my absolute conviction. An almost incredible amount of testimony is fresh in my memory. The scene when I first introduced the passionate little lover of birds and beasts to Sir Edward Grey was one of the most interesting I have ever witnessed, and my whole intimate association with the child from fairyland was a revelation of what a child's mind can be." Well, the storm blew over, and Opal was forgotten, until I found her again and was able to make her known once more. In the meantime, what had happened? Somehow she went to England, and possibly to France. She claimed that she met the Duchess of Chartres, the mother of Prince Henry. Amongst her papers I found 2 letters, which appear to be drafts of letters she wrote to her. It's hard to believe that she was not writing about an actual meeting. Madame la Duchesse de Chartres, Madame of the Rose Garden. Many happy thoughts come to me when I wake up in the morning thinking of you and your rose garden. I'm just thrilled to find how you love the forest, and it makes you more yet to me, beside your being the mother of the voyager. This, of course, was Henry. I feel our meeting is like that of long-time friends, because there is present that bond of so many common interests. Your preferences for the wildness of the forest, your desire to search about for the rare wild flowers, your love of the companionship of books, your sympathy for horses and dogs, your friendship with birds, and your love of flowers. It meant great joy that at the first meeting with the mother of the voyager I should find you with so many flowers around you. I'm so happy here in my little room, thinking of you among the flowers, while I work on the book about him. Referring to Tibetland, of which we were speaking while eating cherries the other day, I wonder if you have yet seen On the Eaves of the World by Reginald Farrar. And here is part of another draft to the Duchess. The thought comes to me that for the cover of the book, the painting which you showed me on the wall, the one of Monseigneur Henri seated on those steps in the Orient, would be excellent for the cover paper with the name of the book. Where did she see this picture, if not with the Duchess? The next time we hear of Opal is even stranger. She is now in India, in Udaipur. An American woman said she had seen Opal driving in an open carriage during a ceremonial procession, escorted by the house cavalry of His Royal Highness the Maharana of Udaipur. She said she was quite sure it was Opal. Ellery Sedgwick wrote to the Maharana. His reply said that it had been his high privilege to entertain Her Royal Highness Mademoiselle Françoise de Bourbon-Orléans, and that a series of fêtes had been given to do her honour. It was about her experiences here that she wrote the articles for the Queen magazine. Well, time passed, and we next find Opal back in England, living in Hampstead. My correspondent, who first told me about her when I was in the BBC, wrote, "I met her once only. She wanted to see my baby girl. I felt at home with her at once. I remember a small, rather grubby, graceful and gracious hand, an air of quiet dignity in a small round person, and brown eyes with an expression at once childlike, appealing, sad, and wise. She asked in a gentle way if she might hold the child. I remember handing over the baby rather doubtfully, then felt a pang of envy to see how expertly those little hands soothed it, and the soft voice calmed it." Now, what happened next? Apparently, soon after the war, her neighbours found her wandering about, sometimes creating a disturbance. They sent the authorities to investigate. They found her living in conditions not far removed from squalor, and took her to hospital. Here she was certified as mentally ill, and there she spent the rest of her life. It was there I went to see her, as you have heard. What is the truth? Is there any truth in her claims? Is the diary the work of a child, as she said it was? Is she related to the French royal family? Was her mother an Indian princess? Or is it all a fantasy? People are quick to deny all the claims she made. The French royal family will have none of her, but is that surprising, especially if she was illegitimate? From all accounts, she was not an easy person, but what genius is? If her story is true, she spent her life yearning to be accepted, and unable to convince anyone of the truth of her claim. And if her story is not true, she must have had an equally insecure life, uncertain of her own identity, rejected by both her real family and her imagined one, and having started on her strange journey, there could be no turning back. Mrs. Woodruff, who befriended her and paid for the storage of her books and papers, wrote this: "Anyone who reads the diary will feel convinced that she is not Opal Whiteley. I mean the child of the Whiteleys, whoever else she may be. The amazing erudition and European culture could never have been acquired by anyone living all their lives on a lumber camp in Oregon. Many suggestions have been made about her parentage, that her mother may have been a servant or a retainer in the French royal household, that her parents were French Canadians. Members of the French royal family were in Canada from time to time. The Duke of Orleans was in America in 1905 when he led an expedition to Greenland. 1905 was not long after Opal appeared in Oregon, and it is known that he visited a Canadian family, one of whom later moved to Oregon. My correspondent suggested that the man who wears grey neckties and is kind to mice in the diary, and who always seemed to be looking after Opal, may have had some connection with the Orleans family. There is much evidence in the diary itself that it was written by a child, not by an adult looking back, but by a child writing about an immediate experience. Much of it is like a running commentary. One feels that she came in from the woods and wrote down at once all she had seen and experienced while it was still fresh in her mind. The wind was calling. His calling was to little woodfolk and me. He did call more again. "Come, petite Françoise, go explores." He was in a rush. I raced. Brave Horatius ran. We played tag with the wind. By and by we came to a log. It was a nice little log. It was as long as 3 pigs, as long as Peter Paul Rubens. I climbed upon it. I so did, to look more looks about. The wind did blow in a real quick way. He made music all round. I danced on the log. When we were come to the house of dear love, they were standing by the steps. The husband of dear love did bring home to her a little nest that was in a tree that they did fall in the far woods today. The husband of dear love did think these little birds were most ready to fly from the nest when the tree did fall today. All the 6 little birds but one did get death as the tree did fall. They were such little things when we did take them out. The one live one was hungry, and we did feed him. We did feed him little bits at a time. A little bit of egg that was left in the dinner pail of the husband of dear love did give to this little bird some satisfaction feels. Dear love did cuddle it warm in her hands, and her husband did make the piece of egg into little divides for me to give to it. It did open its mouth most wide, and every time I did drop a piece of egg into the mouth of the little bird, I did open my mouth wide too, from seeing the bird do it. This, surely, was the work of a child. It is like the running commentary which frequently accompanies children's activities. Opal comments on what impresses her at the time, and from the point of view of a child, remembering vividly the small details which would be real to her at the time they happened, but would fade with the years. Here she is, recording exactly what she did to her sunbonnet, as a child remembers the simple details of an action just performed. I didn't put my sunbonnet back on my head again, but I did give the strings a little tie in front so it wouldn't come off again. And here are the details of lacing up one's shoes. I drew my toes away from the water and let the sun dry my feet so I could put my stockings on. When I did have my shoes most laced up to the top, I gave the strings a tuck in and started on. Here she is, describing the feeling of soft mud between the toes, an experience of delight essentially childlike, but one which fades with the years. Today is more rain come again. I like rain. I like the music patterns it does make. I like to have the feels of it on my head. When it rains, I like to go barefooted. I like to feel the clean mud by the lane ooze up between my toes. Opal's account of her loose tooth takes one back immediately to 7-year-old days, to the feeling when the tongue could not leave the waggling tooth alone. One of my tooths is loose and a queer feel. It was funny feels, its being loose. Surely it is a child who is describing the ritual of pulling it out. Even the colour of the string to be used is important. After I did eat some of my mush, I did go to the string box and I pulled out a string. It was a white one. There was lots of white string in that box, and a pink one and a green one. I put the white string back, and I pulled out the green one. I did tie one part of it around my tooth with carefulls. Then I did come a walk over to where the broom stands behind the back door. I did tie the other end of the long green string to the broom handle. I went to walk off. The tooth didn't come out. The green string did just have a slip off the broom handle. After a further unsuccessful attempt, she says, "Then I thought I'd wait until after dinner. I took the string off my tooth, but I left it on the doorknob to remind me to do it after dinner." Then comes a description of a visit to the woods, during which she refers once or twice to the tooth, and at length she goes home to the green string and successfully pulls out the tooth. It is her last remark, which seems to put the very stamp of childhood onto the account. When the tooth is finally out, she says, "Then I did do the green string up in a roll. I am going to keep it." It is a most unusual grown-up, looking back to such an incident over the years, who would say of the string which had performed this important task, "I am going to keep it." But how exactly right it is for a child. There are many indications in the diary of the size of the writer. She tries to manage a full-size broom, and finds it does not behave for her as it does for the mamma. First, I swept the floors in a careful way. The broom made bobby moves. That broom in my hands makes not moves like the moves it does make in the hands of the mamma. It has so much of tallness. I look up its handle. The baby was heavy for her to carry about. This baby has likes for many things. It does have such likes to be rocked. The mamma does have me to rock it and teeter it on the bed and walk the floor with it. Sometimes it does get most heavy. Then I do let my knees bend under, and I do sit on the floor and rock it back and forth. She was small enough to hide her head in a grown-up's apron. When I was come to the house of Sadie McKibben, she was washing clothes. On wash days along in the afternoon, her hair does hang in strings about her face, and her nice blue gingham apron with the cross-stitches on it does have rumples and soapy smells. I do know so, for I do smell those soapy smells when I cuddle close to her apron on wash days. From time to time the family moved from one lumber camp to another. Before one of these moves, Opal tells how she collected together and made a list of what she would take with her. What an essentially childlike list it is. There is 7 of the tail feathers of Lars Porsena that he did lose when he did lose his tail, and there is 4 old horseshoes of William Shakespeare that the blacksmith did have allows for me to have when he was putting new shoes onto William Shakespeare, and there is the thimble of dear love that she has given me to carry drinks of water to the folks in the hospital, and there is Elsie's baby's little old shoe that got worn out, and she gave me for Nannerl Mozart to sleep in. And there is the eggshells, Ben Jonson and Sir Francis Bacon, and Pius VII, and Nicholas Boileau, and Edmund Spenser, and Oliver Goldsmith, and John Fletcher, and Francis Beaumont, and Cardinal Richelieu, and Sir Walter Raleigh, and the rest of Minerva's chickens hatched out of. Opal tells of the death of one of her school friends, Lola. She gives a simple and poignant account of how the child lay still in a white silk dress while the children gathered round and sang. It is clear that she does not fully understand what has happened, but in the characteristic way of young children, her attention is quickly distracted from what she has not understood. She sees a butterfly, and then a wasp fetching mud for its nest. These are real for her, and have more meaning than the appearance of death. And there was brave Horatius by the steps, and I saw a yellow butterfly, and a little way away there was a mud puddle. By the mud puddle was a gep. She came, she went. Every time she did come, she did take a bit of mud for her nest. I did watch, and I had seeings she was making a cradle of mud for a baby gep to be. I have wonders if Lola will wear her white silk dress to school when fall time is come. I looked more looks about. Among the grasses on a little bush was a katydid. Its wings, they were folded close, and it was washing its front feet. Another passage illustrates this same childlike quality, the ability to be quickly distracted from what one does not fully understand. And while I did have watches of the plant folks that dwell about the moss box, and while I did have listens of the songs in the tree-tops, Then it was the Ponce girl with the faraway look in her eyes, and the man of the long step that whistles most all of the time did come walking through the woods. I had sees there was joy lights in her eyes, and the looks he looked at her was like the looks the young husband of dear love does look at her when he has come home from work at eventime, and I did reach out my arms above them for blessings to come. They had not knows of my reaching out my arms above them, they did just have sees for one another. I have sure feels they didn't see that green caterpillar having sleeps under the green hazel leaf. He did take out a ring of gold, and he did tell her what was his mother's wedding ring, and the caterpillar that was asleep did have wake-ups, and he crawled a little more under the hazel leaf. He did kiss her again. Last year I had more green caterpillars like unto this one, and they did grow and change, and they was very big brown moths with velvet wings and velvet feet. And he did say, I want to help you to have the love-joy in the world. And the fat green caterpillar fell off the leaf away down on the ground. To Opal, the caterpillar was as important and worthy of her close observation as the young couple, and the account is essentially childlike in its naive mixture of remarks about both. Opal died in February 1992. Her funeral was almost as surprising as her life. She had no family, no money, dependent on the state for more than 40 years, but her funeral was attended by a member of the English House of Lords, a professor from Cambridge University, the sister of another English peer, a professor at the Iowa University College of Law, the official solicitor to the Court of Protection, and friends who had known and admired her. Her little coffin was carried into the oldest Catholic church in England, almost covered in white lilies, to the accompaniment of Gregorian chanting from the gallery. Then followed a full Latin requiem mass, while a film crew slipped quietly round the ancient church, recording all the service for television. From here she was taken to England's most prodigious cemetery, Highgate, now so full of the great that it has been closed for many years. Here we left her, among the ivied statues and silent monuments of the famous. The inscription on her gravestone reads, "She spoke as a child." I believe many children are as sensitive and perceptive as Opal, but very few are able to put into words their thoughts and understanding. She was unique because she was able to do this. So few of us adults remember how it felt to be a child. The years for most of us have misted it all over, and because we have forgotten, we are unable to enter into the inner life of our children, into their minds and feelings. So we blunder along, perpetuating the barriers of misunderstanding that separate us, and that make children feel we do not understand, and turn away. If her diary can help us to be more aware of the inner, hidden life of childhood, it will have served a great purpose, of which I believe she would have been glad. She believed her angel parents had told her, "Make earth glad, little one," and nothing could have been closer to her wish than to reveal to the insensible world of grown-ups the vital world of the child. It has been suggested that Opal is of the company of Gilbert White, Darwin, Richard Jefferies and Fabre. Certainly the diary reveals someone with the touch of Wordsworth. He wrote, "The earth and common face of nature spake to me rememberable things," and here is Opal expressing the same thought. Every day now I do look for thoughts in flowers. Sometimes they are hidden away in the flower bell, and sometimes I find them on a wild rose, and sometimes they are among the ferns, and sometimes I climb away up in the trees to look looks for them. So many thoughts do abide near unto us. They come from heaven, and live among the flowers and the ferns, and often I find them in the trees. The story of Opal, difficult to believe and yet impossible to dismiss, is unfinished. The mystery baffles still. There are many questions that will probably never be answered. The more one ponders on the diary, the deeper the tangle grows, and one's mind swings from scepticism to conviction and back again. So much that seems inexplicable, so many improbabilities, are interwoven with what is recognised immediately as truth in this fascinating and apparently insoluble mystery. There is no doubt at all that this child, through her diary, brought some of the colour and freshness of spring into our days and gave us a new understanding of childhood. This was her gift to us. By this she will be remembered, for she made many of us look at the world with clearer eyes and left us richer for having known her. Who the author of the diary really was, and what were the circumstances of her life, neither of these is of great importance. What matters intensely is the insight which her writing gives into the feelings of a child at an age when most children are still inarticulate. Whether it was based on fact or on fantasy, the diary is still a unique record of the inner life of a sensitive child, made while the dew was still on the grass, of one who knew earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes.